Shalom and welcome. My name is Jonathan Sarna. I am the director of the Schusterman Center for Israel Studies here at Brandeis University, and it's really my great pleasure to welcome you to this, our first in a series of summer online webinar presentations. This one focused on Israel after the elections. All of our webinars are being recorded. They will be uploaded onto the Schusterman Center YouTube channel. So if you cannot join us live, feel free to join us later. I also want to invite you to join us in 2 weeks again, when we will have a webinar entitled Plagues in the Land of Israel from Ottoman Times to Our Times with Professor Yaron Ayalon. I want to thank our staff here at the Schusterman Center for planning and executing this very exciting series of webinars. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce my distinguished colleague at the Schusterman Center and the Department of Near Eastern and Judaic Studies at Brandeis University, Professor Yehudah Mirsky, who will moderate today's webinar.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Sarna. And also, right from the get-go, profound thanks to the wonderful staff of the Schusterman Center, especially Anna Simpson, who makes all this happen, and Risa Singer, Wendy Schwartz, and of course, Eli Jacobson from Technical Services, who talk about essential workers. You don't get more essential than that these days. We're living in remarkable times, and remarkable things are happening all over the place, but also back in Israel, in the Middle East. It's just a sign of the times that what's going on in Israel would be preoccupying us greatly if it weren't for everything going aflame in the United States. But we're all glad that we're here to hear from some really thoughtful, insightful observers and participants in the endless political and diplomatic, social and cultural whirlwind of issues around the state of Israel. We're here discussing the aftermath of the remarkable 2019-2020 Israeli political cycle, or if you will, political crisis, right? Remember, Israel held a series of elections, 3 elections between April 2019, April 2020. It was really hard to find, even for those of us who were accustomed to observing all of this, just sort of the splitting and mixing and matching and so forth that took place was really quite a thing to try and keep track of. When the dust finally settled, Israel swore in its 23rd Knesset and its 35th government in ways that were somewhat unexpected. Remarkable number, just sort of a sense of like how big a tent people were trying to create here, is just give you a sense that there are now officially 33 cabinet level ministers in the Israeli government. And not counting the prime minister, and no fewer than 7 deputy ministers. And it's interesting to note who's in and who's out. And it's easier, more instructive to say who's out. The hard right, Yamina, the hard left, or what remains of the hard left, Meretz, the joint Arab list, and one of the things we'll be talking about is one of the most interesting features of this entire election cycle was the way in which the Arab list became a real player in Israeli politics, and of course, Yesh Atid Telem, what was the moderate, the ostensibly moderate center of Israeli party politics, split in 2. Half of its members in the new government, led by Benny Gantz, half in opposition. So how do we make sense of all of this, politically, regionally, societally? So for that, I'm pleased to introduce our very distinguished panelists. And I will sort of briefly tell you a little bit about them in alphabetical order, though if we really told you everything there is to say about them, we'd be taking up all of our time. First, Professor Eva Bellin. Eva Bellin is the Myra and Robert Kraft Professor of Arab Politics in the Department of Politics and the Crown Center for Middle East Studies, as well as the chairman of the Politics Department. She's a specialist in comparative politics whose interests center on issues of democratization, authoritarian persistence, after democratization, political and economic reform, civil society, politics and religion, and the politics of cultural change. Her book is Stalled Democracy, Capital Labor, and the Paradox of State-Sponsored Development, and she co-edited an important collection on building the rule of law in the Arab world, and she's published widely in a variety of scholarly and general fora. She was a Carnegie Scholar of the Carnegie Endowment. She was a fellow at the Princeton Institute for Regional International Studies. She's also in the classroom been awarded Brandeis' Dean's Mentoring Award for outstanding work in mentoring graduate students. She's a member of the editorial board of the journal Comparative Politics, and her fieldwork has taken her to Tunisia, Egypt, Israel, and Pakistan. She's a graduate of Harvard undergrad and did her PhD at Princeton. David Makovsky is the Ziegler Distinguished Fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, where he directs its project on Arab-Israel relations, and he's also an adjunct professor at Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies. He's also a former State Department official. He worked in 2013-14 in the office of the U.S. Secretary of State as a senior advisor to the Special Envoy for Israeli-Palestinian negotiations. He's the author of several books. Most recently, his work he's co-authored with Dennis Ross, Be Strong and of Good Courage, How Israel's Most Important Leaders Shaped Its Destiny, very timely title for now, as well as countless articles, monographs, essays, including in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, Wall Street Journal, the New Yorker, Financial Times, and I could go on and on. Indeed, just yesterday, literally yesterday, yet another remarkably illuminating piece in the Washington Post by Dave Makovsky, who also has had a very distinguished career as a journalist. He was the former executive editor of the Jerusalem Post, a diplomatic correspondent for Haaretz, and contributing editor to U.S. News and World Report, a man of many parts, and a native of St. Louis, Missouri, let us not forget that. And Bar Sananes. Bar is a recent graduate of Brandeis, both the MBA and our Hornstein program in Jewish communal service. She is from Rosh Hashanah in Israel. She was the Israeli emissary to the Jewish Federation of Palm Beach County, where she worked to strengthen Palm Beach's connection to Israeli people, culture, history. She was a graduate of the Interdisciplinary Center in Herzliya in Government Diplomacy and Strategy. She's a graduate of the Honors Rabin Leadership Program. She's a veteran of the Israel Defense Forces. She's active in the field of female empowerment in business, foreign affairs and diplomacy, social entrepreneurship, and Jewish communal work, and very interested in syntheses of the profit and non-for-profit worlds. And currently, but last but certainly not least, she's now interning for the Ruderman Family Foundation, where she's working on the field of inclusion of people with disabilities throughout society. It's an issue very dear to my heart, and I can't not note that our Schusterman Center colleague, Professor Ilana Sobel, is the first person teaching disability studies at Brandeis. So very glad to have you all. The way things are going to work is that our panelists, we will have 2 rounds of question and discussion with our panelists, and then some discussion among ourselves, and then we will open it up to questions. If you have questions, please send them in by chat to my other Schusterman colleague who's with us, Dr. Shana Weiss, who's the Associate Director of Schusterman. She will harvest your questions and put them together, and we will finish up promptly at 1 o'clock. And so, thank you all. And so my first question that I would ask our 3 panelists to speak to briefly in about 2 or 3 minutes. What do you think is the most important takeaway from this remarkable election cycle that we've seen and its eventual result? And what was the most surprising thing to you about all of this? And actually, what wasn't surprising? What, as odd as this all may have seemed, what wasn't surprising all along? Professor Eva Bellin, if we could start with you. Eva, can you hear me?
Well, thank you, Yehudah.
Okay,
yes, can you hear me now?
Yes,
okay.
yes, thank you.
So thank you, Yehudah. So I've been giving this some thought, and I have identified what for me are the 3 most salient outcomes from this election. The first is, and you intimated it when you talked about the ministers, is what we see as the institutionalization of corruption at the expense of the public good and public service. And I'm, again, focusing on the decision of 33 or 34 ministers in the cabinet. That constitutes half of all the members of the Knesset
Eva,
who are part of the Israeli history. And
are you hearing us now? Because we've been having some trouble hearing you. And I'm wondering if you might want to sort of pause, and Anna, if you and Eli could please just work out Eva's Zoom issues. Can we do that briefly? Yes? Let's just pause for that. While hopefully that gets taken care of. So hold that thought and we'll be back, okay?
okay.
Dave Makovsky, please,
it was, you know, as you pointed out, Yehudah, in your intro, I mean, this was extraordinary. Never in Israel's history have there been 3 consecutive elections. You know, the joke is that Israel likes to see itself as the only democracy in the Middle East, but 3 elections in a row is a bit ridiculous. But here you had 3 elections, inconclusive, and a pandemic. And yet, if I had to say, the biggest takeaway is probably that Prime Minister Netanyahu's control, even though you say, well, he needed a unity government, he didn't have a pure right-wing government, that's true. He never got to the 61, which is the bare majority in the 120-member Knesset needed to form a government. But his control is probably as strong as it's ever been in a certain way, despite this configuration. And the evidence of his success, I think, is at least is probably at least 3-fold, maybe 4-fold. One was his ability to get his Likud colleagues to go along with him 3 elections in a row. You'd say, well, if you failed the first time, usually that's it. Well, he got them to stick with him 3 times, and I think if there would have been a 4th round, I think everyone would say they would have gone with him 4 times. He's been able to cultivate this persona as somebody who is, you know, who will stand up on key issues that are of regional significance to Israel, namely the issue of Iran. And that is something that has created almost, I won't say a cult of leadership, but that has helped him solidify his control among his own party. The second thing that he was able to do was to persuade the entire bloc of 58 to stay with him as well, not just his party, but the whole bloc. And you say, well, aren't they more right-leaning? Is that so surprising? Yes, because again, 3 rounds, any of these guys could have peeled off. And he had to sometimes do acrobatics by getting people like Naftali Bennett, who he took as defense minister, he was convinced was about to peel away. And others could have peeled away too. The ultra-Orthodox would be, you know, even though that their grassroots is much more hawkish than in the past, they still would, you know, for money for their institutions, they have a lot of poverty issues. They were willing to probably consider other options, but Netanyahu said, stick with me. In the end, the hardest line right-wing party, as you mentioned, they stuck with him, but Bibi didn't stick with them when he didn't need them anymore. And the third element is that he was able to, you know, to marginalize an alternative to himself. And that's a whole conversation, the role of the joint list. You know, would it have been different if some of these joint list people would have, you know, which they had an impressive achievement, partly as a backlash to some of his actions that overreached. Could they have outmaneuvered him in a certain way? We could have that discussion. Mm-hmm. The fourth element was his ability to split the opposition to him overnight by identifying that half of the party would, blue and white, would join him and the other half would not. What's surprising is that blue and white did not have a strategy that was united, whether this, without getting people bored in the details, a certain parliamentary maneuver that would have said, if you're, you know, being charged with corruption, you can't form a government. Was that a tactic to get a better deal in a unity government, maybe to try to go first? Or was it to avoid a deal? Was it a tactic or a strategy? And the fact was blue and white could not answer that question. they were fundamentally divided over that very important point. And when they couldn't agree on that, whether they would press this as far as they could as a tactic, but would ultimately cut the best deal they could, when they couldn't agree on that, that's where the party split. What wasn't surprising to your question, Yehudah, I think, was Netanyahu's ability to dominate the scene during a pandemic and to really leverage that and to solidify in this period of flux that if he did not get the government he wanted, he would go to a fourth round. And that because Netanyahu was high in the polls, because of the pandemic, because the country rallies around the flag at a time of crisis, a fourth election did not look appetizing. Also, the fact was the blue and white in that third round was at the lower end of their band, so to speak, of support of the three rounds.
Great.
So while they didn't do badly at all, coming from nowhere to so high, 33 seats, still, his ability to leverage in a crisis was not surprising to me. You could say, look, they're political neophytes. They're a new party. What do you want? But three ex-generals should have been able to agree on what is the strategy here and what are the tactics here and what's the difference between strategy and tactics. And their inability to agree on that, I think, is what split the party and helped Netanyahu solidify his political position. I'll stop there. I don't want to go on for too long.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Bar, Sananes, what do you think?
First of all, I'm very honored to be with these two near me, so thank you so much for having me. I think that to your question, Yehudah, I think that elections are the biggest survey that the country can do, and we had three, thank God. I think that even like the biggest institution, the research institutions, cannot get like a gathering of people from one country and to see what they want, to see how they feel about things, unless you're like the census or Pew or whatever. But I think that from what we saw that people want change, and elections they're a big event in Israel in general. It's a public political event that you can see the process and the results, and they have it has a lot of meaning. I think that what we can see here, the most important takeaways for me was that during the elections, the sharp correlation of the two sides, that was even too sharp. I mean, it was not even two camps. It was not even right or left. It was not even about issues. Are you against or pro-settlements? It was like a personalized dialogue, personalized conversation that kind of reminded me the Begin Ben-Gurion days, when it was very personalized, what I like, what I want, my vision. It just now, the conversation of the personalized conversation was more of like what I hate, who I hate, what I don't want to be, and questions like and answers like what I want to improve in Israel is no longer a relevant question. So this was a big important takeaway for me of how things changed during those elections. Also about the results, I think that the biggest takeaway was that the people want change. And you can see that in less than a year, I think it's actually a bit more than a year, Kahol Lavan, blue and white, a party that was just created itself, is kind of moving towards the same results of the regime-controlled party, which is the Likud. So I think that this is a big evidence that the people want change, and that was a very important takeaway for me from the results of the elections.
Mm-hmm.
What was very surprising for me, I 100% agree with what David Makovsky said. I don't want to repeat what he said. I want us to have make people to say new things, and so people can hear a lot. I would just say one nuance that was surprising for me is that the involvement of the Arab parties during the elections. Mm-hmm. I think that they're becoming. We can see some. A lot of changes in their personalities, in their identities, in their the rate of their votes, and I think that this was very surprising for me personally, and the talk of like collaboration in the government, and of course there was an anti-talk afterwards, but I think this was very surprising. And what was not surprising, I think I will say later on in my how Israel is feeling right now, and because so I will continue later on about how I feel and what's not surprising.
It's sort of very interesting that you're both describing a kind of great sort of stasis and things being very stuck, and at the same time, in the course of this process, some surprising things happened. So Professor Bellin will now be joining us without video, sort of as a concession to the limitations of our Zoom technology. But Professor Eva Bellin, please continue from where you left off.
Well, I'm not sure how much you heard, so I'll briefly just repeat what I said before.
Please.
So I see really three consequential outcomes here. The first is we see the institutionalization of corruption at the expense of public good and public service. Maybe that's not entirely new in the Israeli scenario, but it's at even higher levels than before. And I guess the decision to appoint 33 ministers, which you mentioned, Yehudah, is really just outrageous. It's way above the norm, even in Israeli experience. It means nearly 50% of the members of the Knesset who are in the coalition are also ministers. That's outrageous levels of bloat. It far exceeds the historic norms in any comparable democracy, parliamentary democracy of similar size. And what it really means is the total fragmentation of the party system in Israel, because parties are just increasingly platforms for the ambitions of individual politicians, rather than being aggregators of the will of the people, consistent communicators of wills and preferences. And that's really, really bad for Israeli democracy. The second signal event I see in these elections is the irreversible decline of the left in Israel. That's just become so clear in the last year and a half. You know, as recently as 1992, Meretz and Labor together won about 45% of the vote. Okay, and now, and they commanded something like 56 seats in the Knesset. Okay, almost half of the Knesset, and now they're down to a mere 7. I mean, that's kind of shocking to me. And it just shows that the left does not really have, the left does not have a future in Israel, whether that's because of the failure of the peace process, which has demoralized everyone on the left, whether that's because of demographic shifts in Israel, the growth in the size of the ultra-Orthodox community, other communities that are clearly hostile to labor, but that's not going to change. What was really interesting, as I saw in some data reported by the kibbutz movement, that even kibbutznikim voted for blue and white. Something like 50% of kibbutznikim, the classic, source of support for the left movement, were voting for blue and white. And I don't see that changing anytime soon. And the third thing is something that speaks to what both you said and Bar said, and that has to do with the position of the Arab vote. And to my mind, these elections really signal the complete marginalization of the Arab vote. Again, that's not something new, but it's even more disappointing now, because up till now, the feeling was, well, the Arab vote is completely fragmented among different parties. You don't have real incentive to participate among the Arab voters. And in this past election, you had a huge turnout of Arab voting, and you had all the Arabs voting around one united front, and they won 15 seats in Knesset. That's unprecedented. A real chance for them to be integrated into the political process, a real reason for hope. And then Benny Gantz turned his back on them. And there's a real sense of betrayal on the part of Arab activists, and a sense that there's very little reason for hope, that they're just being used, that they're pawns in the Zionist game, and that when push comes to shove, they are not respected. And that's very, very disappointing. Again, not entirely new, but especially more disappointing now in the wake of these elections where they did so well.
Well, thank you very much. And before we go to our next strand of questions, just have to say that, as always, one wonders about the decline of the Israeli left. How much is related to local circumstances? How much of it is a part of also the decline of liberal and left politics in Western democracies? How much of it is social and cultural, and sort of the cultural alienation of the left, et cetera? But that's something we could talk at great length. And what I'd like to do is we're going to have one more round of questions for our panelists, and then hopefully we'll be able to open it up to the questions that we are getting in the chat. And so, David Makovsky, how do you see the election outcomes playing out in the near and middle term regarding Israel's relations with Palestinians, with the US, and with other players like Iran, China, Russia, minor inconsequential actors on the global stage?
Okay, thanks. And I hope we can have a chance to discuss this realignment of Israeli politics. I think what Eva said is important about, and I have some thoughts on that. So I'll save that to the next round if I could. Sure. Look, obviously the most immediate issue is an important issue, and that is the whole annexation debate. Netanyahu has been the longest serving prime minister, and yet he never annexed an inch of the West Bank. Why now? Is he more indebted to the right wing because of his corruption issues, before the court? I think that's a part of it. He's always said, I don't want Israel to be a binational state. But now what's new is that the Trump peace plan of January 28th of this year has almost created an irresistible temptation for him that he has not been able to shake, that he could basically annex about 30% of the West Bank. I have a map here, which I don't know if we have time for. But
if we could see at least one of your maps, that would be great.
Yeah. Okay. So we have one right here.
By the way, let me just pause and tell everyone who's listening in that these maps are part of an ongoing project that David has done that you can see on the websites of the Washington Institute, and it's really both remarkable for the content as well as an example of sort of what digital. We're used to talking about digital social science and digital humanities, and this is digital political geography delivered in a really remarkable way. So thank you.
So I would hope, you can go to, it's called Settlements and Solutions. It's free. Just Google it. And you've got all 130 settlements, how they voted in the last 5 elections, over 600 pie charts, and the aerial photography and their growth of each one of these places over the last decade plus. So what the Trump plan does is to give Bibi an irresistible temptation to say, okay, you want to annex all the settlements? Fine, do it. And that's 130 places. 52 are inside the security barrier, and that's where most of the settlers live, as you see here with the numbers. And these numbers have just been updated last few months. We just updated them last week, actually, so it's one of my first presentations with them. But we just got new data that just as of the end of December of 2019. But what the Trump plan is to take all these inside the fence places and to say, you know what, you could also annex outside the fence. What do I care? So it's another 78 places, another 107,000 people beyond the 348,000. And then that 78 includes, as a subset of the 78, what's called the Jordan Valley. That's on the right side of the map that you're looking at, that purple area up and down. And we have superimposed the Trump peace plan on this number. So we've been able to do this, what Yehudah correctly called the digitization of political geography, to reflect the Trump plan. Now, this would have the 130 places, 15 of them would be inside this Palestinian entity. The Palestinian areas are all yellow. Those are the villages. The darker, the blue is where the settlers are. The purple area would be Israeli, but they would include these 15 enclaves. So what the annexation plan does is put together something irresistible for a right-wing government. Is to say, all these years, American presidents have been like, you would say the word to the left of an Israeli prime ministers. Now you're going to have the first American president to the right of an Israeli prime minister. So it's like an open check. And so the question is, does Bibi go for it? Dennis Ross and I wrote this book, Our Fear of the One-State Challenge to Israel, how this would, its impact on Israel's ethos as a Jewish and democratic state, which I think is part of the shift from the left to the center, but saying, well, peace might not be possible, but let's at least preserve that. And that means not annexing all these places. But so the question is, does Netanyahu do this? And what's fascinating is the overlay for our audience with the American presidential election and his interest in doing this on July 1st. Why July 1st? Because his fear of the American presidential outcome. Maybe Trump will lose. So you've got to front load as much as you could front load on the annexation. You don't want this to be done in October. What if Biden is ahead? It won't look good to do it then. What if you want to try to leverage Trump's relations with Gulf Arab states? Well, starting Labor Day, traditionally presidents are extremely busy in a re-election year. Of course, this year is upside down because of Corona. But so do it as much as you can and as early as you can. So that's his leverage. I mean, that's what he's trying to leverage here is the American presidential cycle. Now,
it's also as we've seen throughout, Netanyahu historically, he's tactically audacious and strategically cautious. So
he's very risk averse. That is correct. And so that's why it'll be interesting. And here, the flip side of this is what's going on in the US. And I realize we've got a lot of other things going on and people have not always been focusing. But I would say there are three distinct camps. I'll make this very, very brief on the American side that are not all where Netanyahu is. One is the American ambassador to Israel, David Friedman, a confidant of the president, who used to be the head of American Friends of Bet El, which is a prominent flagship settlement outside of the security barrier. And his view is more driven by ideology, and he wants, annex them all now. And he basically said the Palestinian state part, well, they'll get that. He said when the Palestinians become Canadians. So that's one camp. Then there's I would say, Pompeo camp. And he made a special trip. He doesn't travel during Corona, but he made a trip. And he's, from what I hear people around him, he's nervous about what happens strategically. Is this a distraction from Iran as the main regional threat? Could this destabilize Jordan? What does this mean for Gulf-Israel relations that are right now under the table, and they're starting to come above the table, Israel being invited to Expo in Dubai? Three different camps. But the third camp is Kushner, and I think he's the camp to follow because he sees it through the prism of American presidential politics. Could this help Trump, especially if he needs every vote? He's having problems with the protest movement in the United States. But do the evangelicals care? We see polling data that their kids have different views than their parents. It's unclear to me if they do. But they're looking through this annexation debate through three different prisms. And I think the Pompeo wing is trying to empower Gantz and Ashkenazi. Gantz is now the defense minister, Ashkenazi, the foreign minister. These are the leaders of blue and white. And it's almost to say, we want to do this deal with all of Israel or as much of the government, not just with Bibi. And so that means
it's almost, I need to,
sorry, I'll stop here. I don't want to talk
It's okay, no, because we could talk about this truly forever. But Eva Bellin, how do you see, David started talking about the regional context of the Gulf states. How do you see the outcome of this Israeli political crisis election cycle in terms of the regional politics of the Middle East as a whole?
Well, here's the thing. Interstate politics in the region, they're governed by strategic state interests. And so for the last several years, we've seen a warming of relations between Israel and many key Arab states like Egypt and Jordan and Saudi and UAE, because we've seen a warming of those relations because of shared security and economic interests, right? So in Egypt, both Israel and Egypt have an interest in reining in Islamic extremists in the Sinai. They have an interest in reining in Hamas. They have an interest in developing their gas resources and the infrastructure necessary to make that deliverable to markets in Europe. So they have real common interests. With regard to Saudi Arabia and the UAE, Israel and the Gulf states share an interest in containing the threat posed by Iran, right? They're allies in the struggle against Iran's rising influence. And with regard to Jordan, Israel and Egypt share an interest in containing the threat of Palestinian extremists. So none of these basic shared interests have been changed with the election. The only thing that's changed is this announcement by Netanyahu that he's going to go forward with unilateral annexation. So what does that mean? And what does that mean for relations? Well, it's problematic to some degree, but not as much as you might think, right? Because again, the leaders in these countries are fatigued with the Palestinian cause. They're not deeply committed to fighting the Palestinian battle, but what they are very concerned about is maintaining popular support, right? So to the degree to which this annexation sets off popular protest at home is really problematic for these countries, because all of these countries are facing serious stressors right now. Okay, in part due to COVID-19, but in part even predating COVID-19, right? Jordan has been in deep economic crisis for several years now. It's only been made worse by the COVID-19 epidemic. There are lots of demonstrations about unemployment and lack of benefits. And so the King of Jordan is very concerned about this annexation process. He's concerned about popular protest. He's concerned that this might spell an end to the peace process. And he's taken some symbolic steps to punish Israel. I read in the paper he's closed off, he's ended leases of Jordanian enclaves, Israeli leases of Jordanian enclaves in Sofar and in the Arava Valley and some other things. So he's very concerned. Right. Saudi Arabia is also facing significant stressors due to the fall in oil prices and plunging Saudi revenues. So MBS is also, the Mohammed bin Salman is very concerned that annexation might trigger popular protest. And Egypt too is facing serious economic crisis. So all of these countries, I doubt that they're not enthusiastic about embracing the Palestinian cause, but they might be forced to at least take symbolic measures in cooling their relations with Israel if this annexation triggers popular protest.
And I just have a very quick question, if you could answer just very briefly, as a scholar of comparative politics. You were describing certain sort of structural changes in how Israeli politics is working, Israeli party politics is being structured. Do you see that as part of any regional, sort of, is Israel becoming more like its neighbors in terms of its internal politics and structure and governance, or is it not? Or how do you see it in those frames? Before I ask Bar, Sananes has been waiting very patiently. Another question.
Well, I mean, most of the countries surrounding Egypt are not democracies, so it's kind of difficult to make comparisons. But what's very interesting, and people might be uncomfortable with this, but I see some very interesting comparisons to what's happened in sub-Saharan Africa, where you get, that region has seen a fair amount of democratization since the early 90s. But what's happened is you've seen huge fragmentation of the party systems in those countries, in part because incumbent presidents are very smart, the way Netanyahu has been, or the way this coalition has been, the two ruling governors, in splitting off leaders from different parties by offering them cabinet posts. This is something you see all over sub-Saharan Africa. And so you see the huge fragmentation of the political system and the decline of parties. And so that is not exceptional to Israel. And apparently that was also the case in Italy at some point. I don't know the Italian history as well. The other thing that's interesting and kind of frightening is you see Netanyahu in the past year or two, especially, following the same script that all these populist dictators have been embracing, whether it's Hungary or Poland or whether it's Trump. The same kind of language. You even see him using language like fake news and pulling on ethnocentric tropes to push his agenda. I mean, it's not new to Netanyahu, but it's just interesting how it's all falling in line with populist autocrats elsewhere. And part of this process of what they call democratic backsliding.
Right, or at times it seems that they've been falling in line with him. Bar Sananes, so what, from your perspective, what does this election result in this new government and this new reality tell us about the shape of Israeli society now and looking towards the future?
Thank you for this question. I would start by saying that usually I'm a positive person. I think that my answer for now will be a bit negative as I see it. I'm currently in Israel, and Israel got back to its routine. Of course, the reality is very, very much changed, but the situation, if I can describe it in some key words, will be people are desperate, people are disappointed. There is a lot of people are not involved with what's happening. After a few years in the US, I can say that the Israeli society is very political society with structured opinions about the Israeli politics and about the Israeli reality and what's going on in Israel. And I would say that now it's not the situation. And I don't think that the pandemic was what caused it. I think it was even before that. I would say that, as I mentioned before, the correlation between in the society. So I guess that there is pro-Bibi and against Bibi. And it seems like Bibi is in control, like he's in the selected one against all odds. Even if you pro or anti-Bibi, I think that even when he couldn't have a government, a coalition, a few times, even when there are cases against him, court cases, even if he's choosing his own personal favor in his acts and steps, you can still see that there is a lot of so even if you with him or against his way, I think that Israelis are very apathetic to what's going on. And there's a lack of loyalty to him and to the government in general. I think that it comes into expression mostly. It started with the election. I think that many parties, and I think that the panelists that with me can agree if they are very much involved. So it started in the election when many parties had not even a portfolio of what they believe. What is their opinion with the conflict about economical issues. And so I think that even if you're a citizen that want to know something about a certain leader in your government, so you don't even know what he or she thinks about what's going on and what's the vision for the future.
And the most ideologically driven parties are out of power now, like from the left and the right. They're all
exactly, yes.
Ones who actually debate ideology all the time.
Yeah, so I think that people also feel that they're unrepresentative and not being listened by their, so I think that even now we can see the results of the government. As you mentioned, Yehudah, we have 43, you said? 43 ministers?
Who's counting by now?
So I think that look at the steps that have been taken. Right. So now Bibi and Gantz are being cutting from. Look, millions of people are now at home after the pandemic, lost their jobs. They have nothing really. They're doing nothing and lost a lot of money. The economical situation of Israel is not so good. And what the government is doing, they're cutting millions of shekels from interior offices, from the education offices, 9 million shekels, from public services offices. Why? So they can have more ministers, more offices, more departments, more buildings, more cars, more security for those ministers. Is that the right steps? Who am I to say? I'm just here talking my people. I think.
Yeah, so we see once again this remarkable paradox of Israel that, sort of at the level of government, incredibly static and bloated. And there's like remarkable dynamism in the world of non-governmental organizations in the private sector, and it doesn't translate outside of, say, the army. It doesn't really translate into government. Just one sentence or so more, because I would like us to get to the questions from our.
Yes, sure. So I think that for now, I think that the practical steps that Israelis are feeling or doing is that there are not even protests about political situations. You open Ynet, you open Times of Israel, I'm not sure, but you open the biggest Israeli news website. There's nothing about political current situation. Maybe that's the pandemic, I'm not sure, but I think that there's lack of interest, lack of involvement, and a lot of disappointment. My eyes towards the future, I don't know, who knows?
Let's honest.
But yeah, so.
Nice to be talking to an honest commentator. I think lots have gotten lessons in the last few years about how little we understand about the future.
Yeah, but I would love to hear questions if people want to know what's happening now in Israel, and I will finish here. Thank you.
So before I continue, so we're going to now take the questions that Dr. Weiss has been getting from everyone in the chat. And I know everyone who's listening or watching us, in large part you're here also thanks to a colleague whom I was remiss in not mentioning, that's Karen Goodblatt of the Schusterman Center. So thank you, Karen, for all of your hard work to make this possible. So I will share some of the questions that we've gotten. One, will the government interfere with the corruption trial against Netanyahu, right? We haven't talked about that much, even though that's huge. And however this trial proceeds, the question is, can the trial results be trusted? Another question is, you know, is there such a thing as an average Israeli by now? I mean, you know, my own sense is that this election cycle is part of this decades-long reconsolidation of the Israeli center. But you know, I'd be curious to hear what others say. And other folks are interested about, you know, what might be the political fortunes of Yair Lapid. You know, sort of, he was the every few years, you know, the Israeli center sort of finds a new politician who's going to sort of lead them out of the desert, and it never quite works. And people are also curious to hear more about Benny Gantz, who's sort of an unknown quantity to Americans. So would one of you, David, would you care to take a crack at sort of the issue of the corruption trial?
Sure. Look, I think it does speak something to the Israeli, the vitality of Israel as a democracy, that the courts thing is moving forward. And I think all these judges are people that have been tough. I think at least two of them have presided in other corruption cases with politicians. And there's no nonsense of the three-person panel. I don't know if the third one has been involved in corruption cases. And it's going to take years. You know, the issue is, I think, I believe very much in the democratic system there. I do think they will, you know, give their verdict without fear or favor. But the question,
that's why he's so but that's precisely why Netanyahu spends, you know, works so hard delegitimizing the judiciary.
Right. I was just about to say it. You know, that's very upsetting. That you know, to diminish Israel's institutions that it's built up over 70 years. And I'm sorry to say that there's some echoes of this over in our country. You know, this idea of trying to build yourself up by tearing down the institutions that are very hard fought for to build up over decades. I think it's very sad. But right now, you know, the courts are not giving way. The issue will be, even if he's guilty, will he, you know, be able to exhaust every appeal to the Supreme Court and stay in power the way the law is now for an existing prime minister? Because the Israeli system is, any cabinet minister who's indicted has to step down, except if you're the prime minister, because it's a domino effect and the whole government would have to resign. And so basically that protection, it looks like, is going to be given to Bibi as, quote, alternative prime minister is the title, even in those final years, if there is a rotation. And people, you know, have their doubts. Will Bibi go through with it politically? He says parity, but there's a disparity in seats. He's got 52 seats with the right-wing satellites, and Gantz is 19. But we'll see. So I have really no doubt that the court system will be held in the best tradition of Israeli democracy, despite all these efforts to besmirch the courts and the Attorney General Avichai Mandelblit. The question will he be insulated like any prime minister is, even if he doesn't have the role, if there is a handover post November 2021.
Right. Thank you. So Eva Bellin is somebody, you've written a lot about rule of law in the Middle East and the Arab and Muslim worlds. How do you see sort of the issues, tribulations, et cetera, of Israel's judiciary? Because the judiciary and the rule of law and even the police force have become real political footballs in Israel's election cycles, not only this last one, but in recent years. So I'm curious, from a comparative point of view, how you see that playing out. Is Israel doing better, so to speak, in terms of rule of law? I mean, you know, how and the institutional stresses on it. How do you see that?
Well, the key thing to maintain the autonomy of the judiciary, and especially the Supreme Court, is to maintaining various institutions that prevent the court from being curbed. Things like an apolitical selection process, protection against being overruled by the legislature through new amendments that give the legislature more power. there were some attempts in the past decade to try to change how the selection process would work, or maybe to even create an alternative court to the Supreme Court, this constitutional court, to remove it from power. And those were really dangerous developments that could have really limited the independence of the Supreme Court and its capacity for constitutional review. I have to say, the fact that Yamina didn't make it into government, and the fact that Ayelet Shaked did not make it into any ministerial post, certainly not Minister of Justice, was to me a huge relief, because they were the leaders of that campaign to try to curb the court. So that makes me a little relieved. And the fact that Benny Gantz seemed to be saying, I'm not going to allow the courts to be, the institutional arrangements protecting the court be undermined, that was a relief to me as well.
So thank you. And again, this sort of part of what makes it so difficult is that when we see it in America, when the criticism of the judiciary is so far-reaching, then it makes it hard even to have reasonable conversations about, are there better ways of improving judicial selection and so forth. Bar, Sananes. So one of the questions that's been coming up in the chat is, how do Israelis see Donald Trump? In America, how, just your sense of people, your cohorts, others folks that you talk to in Israeli society, how is he perceived?
Wow, that's a question that I got so many times, and every time my answer is completely different because things are happening all the time. So who knows, again, what will happen tomorrow? But I think that Israelis are at the beginning and towards the beginning of Trump's cadention. I think that Israelis the majority were pro overall, because of the formula that he's good for Israel, he likes us, he will protect us, and this is good for us, so we like him. Of course, that Israelis, I don't want to generalize at all, but Israelis who are more involved in American politics knows that they know that it's more complex, more problematic, that the diaspora Jews and the general public doesn't like him so much, or like him, but they have issues here and there. So I think that now, mostly after COVID-19, people start to understand that. And I think that when you are a citizen of a different country, so it's natural to compare your country and the acts of your leaders to another country. And I think that after all and overall, Israel was very much under control, the pandemic, and they were always in the news, always reporting about what's going on in America. And it was just horrible to see that. I think that the criticism from the Israeli media and from Israelis who are living over there were directly very sharp towards against Trump and how he acts. And I think that now the opinions are completely changed, especially after what's going on with Floyd and like the recent events that happening. I think
sort of with the Israeli rank and file folks who you're in touch with, how would they feel about Joe Biden becoming president of the United States? Would they be a relief, or would they think, gee, it's a pity because he doesn't love us as much as the other guy, because after all, he was, because there's so many negative things, rightly or wrongly, said about Obama in Israel.
So I think that the ones who know, like from my environment, will be that's concerning, but we know that overall, like we are allies. So Israel and America. So and that's their politics, and we really wonder who they're going to choose. And actually, it's really a riddle to see what will happen, because now with all the mass that's happening, I know that Americans like order, and they don't like to see all those protests and everything that's going on, so they don't want it. So I know in Israel they predict that they might choose Trump again because he can maybe do order, like against I don't know, everything that, so many things are going to, many of the Israelis are asking what will happen. I think that regarding what you asked about Joe Biden, yes, so my friends, my family, they are concerned, the same concerns that were about Hillary. So, so I think that it's not even about the personality, it's about what what is the side that says, the sides that reflects less support in Israel? And I think that's what concerned the most.
Right.
And can I address some other questions that I
Sure,
saw?
sure.
Maybe
And then
quickly?
we'll have one, yes, briefly, because we do want to respect people's time to be done in 5 minutes, but I have one last.
Yeah.
You finish one last
I think
question
it also
first.
relates to what you asked me, because people ask here, what is the Israeli average, if there's such a thing? And I think it's mainly, there is, I think, the average Israeli, and it's mainly about what concerned the average Israeli is first the interior issues. So Trump is not dealing, is not in the minds of Israelis all the time, I think. Even if we know that America is a big ally, it's still what's important the most is the issues that happening in the country. Even now, with everything that happened in the US regarding Black Lives Matter, Israelis are saying, wait, stop. Don't you care about the Ethiopian community first? Like, why are we even talking about it? So you can see those, that Israelis first, they want order in the interior issues that happening in the country. Now what's very hot right now is women and representative of women, because we're experiencing domestic violence, we're experiencing husbands murdering their wife, case after case after case, and that's something that gets a lot of criticism towards the government. Why we have minister for high education in addition to education minister, but we don't have anyone to represent those issues against the domestic violence. Why? So, and I think that this is the average Israeli right now.
Thanks.
One more thing about Benny Gantz, because I saw a question about it. So I see here, I feel a bit sorry for Benny Gantz, because at the beginning, his reputation was a lot of dynamic of like high reputation of, wow, he's so considerate in the public and in the Israeli society. We have a lot of big hopes for him because he might do a lot of changes. And now, because he went with Bibi with this agreement, and of course he has here and there some things that he did good, even now when he's dealing with Bibi, which is a very, very tough character to deal with. For example, all of the ministers of blue and white, they cut their salary in 20% because of what's happening. So they are trying to consider the public, but now his reputation is completely switched 180 degrees. From a politician who wants all and like greedy for everything. So I feel a bit sorry for him. So if we talk about his future, if he's not going to do something major to save his reputation, I think that I don't know what will happen in a year and a half.
So thank you. Thank you very, very much. So we have about 3 minutes left, and I'd like Eva Bellin and Dave Makovsky like to give you some last words. If you'd care to address issues that came up in the chat, is the state of Palestinian politics today, and people ask about the future state of Israel's relations with American Jews. You can take either one, of course, topics we could talk about forever. But Eva Bellin, would you care to take a crack at that first one? Then we'll, with Dave Makovsky, bat us home.
Yehudah, can I defer to you say something about relation between Israel and American Jews? I'm sure you have more insight.
For me to say Israel about, well, but would you care to say anything about Palestinian politics then?
Well, I think it's really interesting. I'd be curious to hear what David says about what was in the paper this morning and the Palestinian Authority's decision to essentially hold up its hands and say, we're going to stop running the show, and somehow that's going to put a break on the annexation policy. I'm curious to hear what David thinks about that.
Right. So, David?
Yeah, look, Abu Mazen, President Abbas has threatened hundreds of times, I would say, I'm just going to turn the keys over and let Israel run the show. But he hasn't followed through. He's threatened a lot to withhold security cooperation. Now they're not meetings, I understand, but still there's ways of cooperating so attacks don't happen in the West Bank. The beauty of Israel-Palestinian security cooperation has been that each one is doing it for self-interest. It's not been a giveaway to Israel. It's been because this has been good for Palestinians to keep Hamas out, to keep their own cities and streets safe. And I think if people do things for self-interest, it's the best way that it's sustainable. The question is, can you get beyond this? I am worried that annexation is the new X factor that whether they follow through on the threats or not, you know, I could see a situation where it's not 30% annexation, it's not the Jordan Valley, it's, you know, that the U.S. says, no, we want Gantz and Ashkenazi to be part of this, and they say, okay, Malay Adumim and Gush Etzion, and these are areas that people think will be Israel in any final deal anyway. But yet the word annexation, I hope, doesn't set off social unrest in the West Bank or in Jordan. So I am worried about this next month. I do have a feeling the U.S. will succeed in getting Bibi not to do things on July 1st. It's dangerous to predict something so soon because people will hold it back to you. Now there's a video of this recording. But I am concerned in the big picture, and this is what links Yehudah's question to put both pieces of it in one place. I am worried that if there is a full-throated annexation and that basically the chances of a two-state solution go out the window, and Palestinians say, look, we don't need this. Forget this state. It's not happening. It's just not. We want a vote. And by shifting the paradigm from a territorial paradigm to a rights-based paradigm, my fear is what happens to the U.S. diaspora relations with American Jews and with the U.S. writ large beyond the Trump era, that this fringe idea goes more mainstream, and I worry that could isolate Israel and create more, to use the word, not social distancing, but generational distancing among American Jews and Israel. And I'm worried that these two ideas are very linked. So my hope is somehow that cooler heads will prevail, and that even if you cannot solve all this in one point, I mean, this book I wrote with Dennis, which I hope people get a chance to read, and then the podcast I just did on U.S.-Israel relations, decision points, if I could throw in a commercial, it's all on that there were leaders in Israel. And I know the Schusterman Center at Brandeis, which does terrific work, you know, you've done research into these leaders, and they have been extraordinary leaders who have made great journeys. And that's inspirational to us. And I hope that somehow that we'll get over this hump, and that we find a way to avoid the overreach that I worry could have very long-lasting implications.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. And I would just say, you know, as Eva Bellin asked me about U.S.-Israel relations, I would just say two things. One, historically, you know, you want governments in both administrations in both Washington and Jerusalem have tried to play down differences internally within the Jewish community and certainly between Israel and diaspora Jewry. And now we have governments, each for reason of their own, that don't feel committed to playing down those differences and even enjoy deepening them. And the other is that, as always, in many deep ways, Israel matters more to American Jews than American Jews matter to Israel. I mean, once you get outside of Israel's political and a few cultural elites, and American Jews just need to bear that in mind as they think about how, and that doesn't mean that Israel, you know, is might not properly be seen, but as a part of Jewish identity, but that's always something to remember. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to all our participants. Thank you. This was wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye. Stay safe. Good health. Good
Thank you
spirits.
so much, and stay safe.
You.